enforcement to include the sheriff of 2 Florida counties. It has been my distinct pleasure and honor of knowing and working with Ms. Bondi since 2010. As a member of her senior executive staff, I served as the Director of Law Enforcement, Victim Services, and Criminal Justice Programs when she assumed the office of Attorney General in 2011, and I continued to serve in those capacities through her 8-year tenure as Attorney General. To this day, we maintain a very close professional, personal, and family relationship. I want to speak this morning on Ms. Bondi's commitment to the just and proper enforcement of the law, demonstrated through her well-earned relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement partners throughout the United States. During her service as a prosecutor in Florida's 13th Judicial Circuit, Ms. Bondi had well-established, deep-rooted relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. Upon becoming Attorney General, she immediately began the process of meeting all law enforcement leaders throughout the state of Florida to establish partnerships to ensure that our citizens and visitors to our state receive the most effective law enforcement and victim services available. One critical issue that she immediately took on was the emerging proliferation of deadly designer drugs, specifically those referred to as bath salts, that our state had been facing prior to her being elected as Attorney General. Ms. Bondi called together our stakeholders to include prosecutors, law enforcement, our Office of Drug Control, our state lab directors, and many others, to not only seek to understand this new trend in our state, but to seek immediate solutions to stop the spread of these deadly substances that were taking the lives of our citizens. From these stakeholder meetings, she developed a strategy and a call to action to immediately outlaw these dangerous bath salt substances. Utilized in Florida's rule-making statutes and bipartisan support from Florida's legislature, she was able to permanently ban the sale of these deadly drugs, despite the continuous efforts by those who altered their formulas in order to circumvent Florida law in an attempt to keep multiple versions of these harmful substances on some of the shelves of some of our retailers. These actions, in conjunction with our public and private partners, begin to effectively address a growing trend in illegal substance abuse in our state. Ms. Bondi's commitment to the rule of law was also evident in her taking the lead role investigating and prosecuting crimes involving gang activities, organized retail theft, human trafficking, and a host of other criminal activities. She demonstrated her deep commitment to keep and restore the lives of victims of human trafficking through her leadership on Florida's statewide Council on Human Trafficking by investing in and supporting safe houses for victims. She also partnered with multiple private businesses to help combat human trafficking in both the sex and label industries by establishing a zero-tolerance toolkit to train their staff in identifying and reporting suspected cases of human trafficking. I want to now focus on her compassionate side of her tenure, where she was and remains a staunch supporter of crime victims and crime victim rights. One of her roles as Florida's Attorney General was the delivery of crime victim services. The Florida Attorney General's office was the recipient of and administered the 3rd largest annual award of federal crime victim compensation funds, in addition to the state of Florida crime victim funds. Ms. Bondi dedicated a team of experienced victim advocates and crime compensation professionals to work with our local governmental and non-governmental agencies to ensure crime victims receive all the benefits allowable under state and federal laws. Her personal compassion was constantly on full display when meeting with crime victims and their families. I stood beside her at crime scenes when she visited victims in hospital rooms, at family relocation centers, at conferences for victims of crimes, and many times one-on-one in her offices. She demonstrated her commitment to fairness and justice by not only rigorously seeking to hold perpetrators of crime responsible for their acts of violence, but she also demonstrated the same level of passion, care, and empathy for those innocent citizens who found themselves, through no fault of their own, a victim of some of the most horrific crimes committed by individuals against fellow human beings. Mr. Chairman, the United States of America and the American people will be well served by confirming Pamela J. Bondi as our next United States Attorney General. Thank you.
Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the importance of the independence of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice when making investigative and prosecutorial decisions. Before my current position at Georgetown Law, I served for nearly 20 years as a federal prosecutor under Republican and Democratic administrations, and 3 years at Maine Justice, first as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General and later the Acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security. I stayed through the transition into the Trump administration before leaving in May of 2017. I do not know Pam Bondi. I am here today to speak because of my long career at the department, my reverence for the department and its mission and its independence. The lawyers and law enforcement officials at the Department of Justice are critical to preventing the weaponization of the department and preserving impartial adherence to the rule of law. For the Attorney General, this means taking seriously their oath of office, which is to the Constitution, not the President. It means recusal if their impartiality regarding any particular investigation or case could reasonably be questioned. And it means reaffirming long-standing policies limiting contacts between the department and the White House on specific investigations and cases. The oath to the Constitution means that if there is inconsistency between what the President may ask the Attorney General to do and what the Constitution requires, the Attorney General must choose the latter. Although she is a member of the President's cabinet and therefore expected to implement the President's policy priorities, her duties are limited by the Constitution. That means, among many other things, not targeting people or associations for investigation or prosecution based on protected speech or association, not executing searches without a warrant, not denying the equal protection of the law to all people within the United States. It also means that any prior role as part of the President's legal defense team is over once the oath of office is taken. The Attorney General is not the President's personal attorney. She is the attorney for the United States. When President Ronald Reagan nominated William French Smith, his former personal attorney, to be the Attorney General, Smith was asked during his confirmation hearing how he proposed to ensure that his former relationship would not compromise his independence. Smith responded, "I would have to be very conscious of situations where it could appear that because of that relationship, a problem might be created." Smith recognized that legitimate concerns might require his recusal in certain cases to avoid the appearance of impropriety. As relevant to Ms. Bondi, her work defending President Trump during the first impeachment proceedings and public statements she has made about potential prosecutions of those involved in cases against President Trump could create at the very least the appearance of a lack of independence if she were to open investigations into people involved in those matters. Similarly, any involvement in any civil case against the DOJ, a civil case against the DOJ, about which President Trump's attorneys have given notice and which seeks more than $100 million for alleged rights violations rising out of the Mar-a-Lago search, could reasonably raise concerns about Ms. Bondi's impartiality that could only be addressed through recusal. In 1978, 4 years after President Nixon's resignation after Watergate, Attorney General Griffin Bell established the first of what has become known as the department's White House contacts policy. It has been reaffirmed by attorneys general under both Republican and Democratic presidents ever since. The DOJ policy recognizes the tension between protecting the department's independence in making decisions about criminal and civil law enforcement while also preserving the president's ability to perform his constitutional obligations to take care that the law be faithfully executed. The policy thus bars the department from advising the White House about pending or contemplated enforcement actions subject to limited exceptions while permitting communications about the advancement of the administration's policies. Just as in Bell's time, in order to insulate those who initiate and supervise law enforcement investigations, such as line prosecutors and their supervisors, communications with the White House about specific cases must involve only the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General at the department and the counsel or deputy counsel to the President or Vice President at the White House. A parallel White House policy memorialized by counsels to the President over multiple administrations and directed to all White House staff contains similar restrictions on contacts with all departments and agencies. The incoming Attorney General would be well advised to continue to adhere to the White House contacts policy and to urge the White House counsel to do the same. In closing, public respect for the Department of Justice begins with public respect for the Attorney General. That respect comes from the impartial adherence to the rule of law, free from improper political influence. The Senate should ensure that the next Attorney General is committed to taking the steps to earn that respect.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. For a man from a small town in Florida whose father was a trucker and mom was a mail carrier, this is, being before the United States Senate, this is a true blue honor. So thank you for allowing me to be here. I know Pam Bondi. I've known her for about 35 years, and I've known her as a prosecutor. I've been her colleague. I've been her supervisor. She's been my supervisor, and I know her as the statewide prosecutor of Florida. And I hope to share with you a little bit today about what I know about Ms. Bondi professionally, and what I know about her as a prosecutor, and what I do know about her as how she will handle the job of United States Attorney General, if you also decide. When it comes to criminal prosecution, Pam Bondi is unquestionably an ace. She did everything from batteries, DUIs, first-degree capital murder cases. She has experienced almost everything within the American justice system, from going to the scenes of these tragedies, to the courtrooms, to the witness rooms, holding hands with the victims of these crimes. Pam really has done it all. She appreciates the rules that make our criminal justice system the best in the world. And I wholeheartedly believe she will apply them and she will follow them. Ms. Bondi is a tenacious but a very thoughtful prosecutor. Crimes of violence upset her the most. She and I tried dozens of cases together before juries, including first-degree murders. Her level of preparation was simply outstanding. Her ability to connect with and speak to them on an understandable level was excellent. Juries loved her. Defense counsel respected her, and courts listened to her. It was clear that Ms. Bondi was there because she believed what she was doing. She believed in the case she was presenting. And she really did have that undefinable something that made everybody in the courtroom, juries, judges, maybe even defense lawyers sometimes, want her to succeed. She was excellent and still is. Ms. Bondi is tough. She quickly earned the title of career criminal prosecutor at a very young age due to her very clear feelings about repeat offenders and also her outstanding abilities in the courtroom. Her task was clear: prosecute the habitual offenders seeking out the highest sentence possible. And she did just that. She wouldn't budge in plea bargaining with these repeat offenders that had proven time and time again they weren't going to comply with our laws. And she always held them responsible for their offenses. Due to her tough on crime approach, she found herself in court trying cases before judges and juries routinely. And she loved to be in the courtroom. She loves being in trial. You know, the impact that prosecutors have on lives of people was never lost on Ms. Bondi. I sometimes find myself telling our prosecutors at the Office of Statewide Prosecution, please remember what we're doing here. Our jobs are great. We are so fortunate to have these jobs. But the amount of power that we wield and how this power will impact people is remarkable. Just the issuance of a simple subpoena can ruin a life, and that's an everyday thing for us. Pam Bondi understands that. She realizes it. As you've heard, she's done it for 18 years in the courtroom, and also the 8 more as the Attorney General. When she became the Attorney General, she didn't forget her experiences as a prosecutor. One of the things that she brought for me as Florida statewide prosecutor, which I'm very fortunate now to have continue under our current Attorney General in Florida, Ashley Moody. One of the things she did is she really shielded me from the politics. She understood how politics can impact what we do every day in a courtroom. And I will forever be grateful to both of them for shielding me from those politics. With all due respect, prosecutors, we don't usually want to be politicians. We just want to go in and do what we're supposed to do. And Pam Bondi made the job not only capable for me to complete, and I feel complete well, but she made it fun. She made it something I really enjoy doing. And I will be forever grateful to her and General Moody for allowing us to do that. I said a lot more in my statement, and I'll let my statement stand. I know it's in the record and you all will hear it, and I've got about 12 seconds left. But I do want to say that on the question of independence, I've experienced times with Pam Bondi where I've said to her, it's a different role than what you all are talking about, but where I've said to Pam Bondi, General, no, we can't do that. She might disagree with me. She may let me know she disagrees with me. But in the end, she'd look at me and say, do what you've got to do. And that happened several times, a lot. She understands that. And I think she will be an excellent Attorney General. Chairman, if I might say to my colleagues at the Department of Justice, the prosecutors, as Mr. Ehrenberg said publicly, they have nothing to fear from Pam Bondi as a prosecutor. And to the contrary, I truly believe they will love working for her. Pam Bondi understands the rule of law. She understands the impact on lives. She understands what we do. And I believe wholeheartedly that all of them will love working for Pam Bondi like I have. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
I thank all of you for being very careful about not going over the 5 minutes. Thank you all very much for that. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ehrenberg, and my staff gives me information that maybe you don't mind telling people that you vote for Democrats and that you voted against President Trump. I'm just saying that you probably don't mind us saying that, or you wouldn't have told us. You clearly have political differences with Ms. Bondi, and I'm sure you disagree with her on many issues. So what would you say to critics of Ms. Bondi who believe that she is, quote unquote, too partisan to serve as our nation's Attorney General?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those critics should talk to her political opponents in the past, like me, like Dan Gelber, who was the Democrat who beat me, who ran against her in the general election. They're friends. It's rare these days that you see people who battle it out in a general election remain friends after all these years. She had relationships across the aisle within the Florida legislature. I know because I was in the Florida legislature before I ran for Attorney General, and I saw it up close. I think some of the criticism comes in that she is loyal to President Trump, and she is. She is. But I never believed that if asked to do something illegal, that she would knowingly do that. She would never step across the line. In my mind, I can't imagine her doing that. I echo what Nick Cox said, is that she's always been tethered to the law. She understands, as a 20-year prosecutor, that prosecutors have to follow the evidence and the law. And because of her background as someone who is not a super partisan, she had never run for office before running for Attorney General. She doesn't come from the world of politics. She comes from the world of prosecutors and in the criminal justice system, that I do believe that she will act in a way that is always tethered to the law and will not cross that line to making purely political decisions.
You worked with her on drug issues very much. Seeing how Ms. Bondi handled the opioid crisis in Florida, how do you think she will handle the crisis on a national level?
I think she's going to get tough on fentanyl across the border. I don't know the specifics on how she plans to tighten up on it, but I know she's going to make it a priority, because when we had an opioid epidemic in Florida and we were the drug supplier for the rest of the country, she went to a reluctant Republican-dominated legislature and told them we needed to pass this prescription drug monitoring program, something that had been stalled for a decade in Tallahassee, and she got it done. I had run on that platform. If I had been elected Attorney General as a Democrat, I don't think I could have persuaded that legislature to do it. But she had the credibility. It took Nixon to go to China. It took her to convince a recalcitrant Republican legislature to pass these needed reforms. So I don't know specifically what she will do, but I know that she will not shy away from standing up to people in her own party who will disagree with her on it.
Mr. Cox, you've worked with Ms. Bondi for 3 decades, and you're also a longest-serving statewide prosecutor. Some have suggested that Ms. Bondi's lobbying and political career will influence her decision-making. In your decades of working with her, have you ever known her to make a decision that was illegal or unethical?
Absolutely not. Ms. Bondi, as Mr. Ehrenberg referred to, and quite honestly, Ms. McCord could tell you as well. Being a prosecutor is about focusing on the law and focusing on the evidence and focusing on really what's right. That's what our job is, to do justice. I know that she's embraced that. She's practiced that. I have never seen anything untoward in any of the cases I ever worked with Ms. Bondi.
And Sheriff Gainey, you served as Ms. Bondi's Director of Law Enforcement and Victim Services. You spoke in your opening statement about Ms. Bondi's work at federal, state, and local, with state and federal and local law enforcement. What would you say is Ms. Bondi's biggest achievement as Florida's Attorney General from the perspective of you as a law enforcement officer?
Senator, her willingness to partner with law enforcement is not uncommon for her to call together sheriffs and police chiefs, state law enforcement and federal, to seek from those leaders and directors what the issues are. Florida is a large state. Those issues are vast, and they change from one state to the other. She sits down with those partners, discusses those issues, and then fiercely do everything in her power to ensure that the men and women in our state and our federal offices in our state have the resources and the tools to do their job. Was not uncommon. We had, during legislative session, Sheriff's Association met in her office. The Florida Prosecutors Association met in her office. She provided space so it can be there to consult with her and her team and her staff on a regular basis as we address issues before our legislature every single year.
Senator Urban.
Sheriff Gainey, let me follow up with you on that subject. You're aware of what happened here January 6th in the Capitol complex and the law enforcement personnel who were attacked by the mob, the demonstrators, and a number of them, hundreds of them, have been prosecuted, and some are serving sentences for violent felonies against our police. Was there anything like that in your background dealing with Ms. Bondi where she's been called on to make a decision on standing up for law enforcement in similar circumstances?
Senator, every single day, quite frankly. She had worked with, we unfortunately experienced law enforcement officers killed in the state of Florida. She was there not only to work with those law enforcement agencies and those families, the respective prosecutors, whether it was our statewide or our local prosecutors or our federal prosecutors. She was a fierce supporter to make sure that the laws of the state of Florida was enforced, that men and women of law enforcement were supported, and that their families knew that she supported them on a regular basis.
Mr. Cox, you talked about several instances, experiences you had with Ms. Bondi when she was under political pressure. Could you tell us a little bit more about one of those?
Quite candidly, there was some pressure at the beginning when Mr. Ehrenberg mentioned about I apologize.
You want to pull that microphone close to you?
That is the first time anyone's asked me to pull a microphone closer.
I may change my mind. Go ahead.
You wouldn't be the first. Many judges have. Ranking Member Durbin, yes, right from the beginning when Mr. Ehrenberg mentioned about the problems we had with the opioid epidemic and the pill mills, she was actually, I will say this, was getting some pushback from our governor, Senator Rick Scott. And it was about the PDMP. And I was there when she sat down with Senator Scott. I believe Sheriff Gainey was there with us as well. And we had a couple sheriffs, and we were speaking with Ms. Bondi about it. She called the governor, now senator, I apologize, right then, and put him on the phone with us and had us discuss with him the need for the PDMP, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Database, and which ended up making a massive change. And to the senator's credit, he sat down and listened to us, asked us questions, and in the end, she convinced him we needed it. And as I recall, it was within the next week or two that he came up here and he announced his support for our PDMP. You know, she didn't have an agreement with a person who she loves. I mean, she very much got along very well with then Governor Scott. And she confronted him about it and changed his mind.
Now, here's a track record.
Yes, sir.
This newly elected president, as former president, fired 2 attorneys general under circumstances where they disagreed with him. Senator Sessions in one instance and Bill Barr in another, and they were both fired. So it's pretty clear that he is not adverse to taking a different position than his Attorney General and having a pretty short temper when it comes to dealing with it. That's the reality of what we see on the record, not once but twice. Can you understand our concern about whether she would react positively if he put that pressure on her?
I can understand your concern, yes, sir. But the Pam Bondi I know as a prosecutor, where her heart is as a prosecutor, and having my experience with her, myself telling her no when she was the Attorney General, I believe she will stand up to it. I truly believe that. She understands what our duty is. She understands, I think, the boundaries of the ethics, as she mentioned several times yesterday. She understands all of that. And she's a true prosecutor. Yes, sir, I believe she will do it.
Thank you. Ms. Gilbert, on this question of conflicts of interest and recusal, Ms. McCord, I invite you to answer this as well in the short time left. You seem to suggest that she can't recuse herself out of her current situation. Her background as a lobbyist and attorney representing private interests, that she might be able to find some response to it, but it can't overcome what you called systemic or whatever the characterization you used. Haven't we had attorneys general in the past with backgrounds in the private sector facing similar circumstances?
We have had lobbyists become attorney general in the past, but nowhere near the scope and scale of Ms. Bondi, with 30 clients of her own in just the last 5 years and coming from a firm that represents such a broad swath of corporate America. It would be very hard for her to remove herself from every situation that touches on these corporate interests. One easy example, I mentioned Geo Group. There's not a pending enforcement action or investigation into them. There is one into their top rival, the other biggest private prison company, Core Civic. She would not be expected to recuse herself from that. However, ramifications from it could impact Geo Group. And so it's just one small example of how interconnected corporate America is and how hard it will be for her to remove herself from all these situations.
I think my time is up. You next time.
Yeah, I'll be acting on behalf of the chair, and I am next in the order. Mr. Ehrenberg, you ran in a primary, got defeated by a Democrat, endorsed that Democrat in the general election against Pam Bondi, and Pam Bondi hired you? Thank you.
Correct, Senator.
Thank you. And actually, I can tell that you've still got a liberal leaning, because in the same sentence that you complimented Pam Bondi, you took a shot at the Republican-led legislature by calling them recalcitrant. So, I mean, folks, you need to pay attention to that. This is somebody who's been a foe, who probably spoke against her in a public setting, and she had the temperament and the good judgment to look past your political views and hire you into her organization. I think that says a lot about people. In fact, I've made friends with the guy that ran against me, and nobody on the Democrat side seems to like him anymore. Ms. Gilbert, this lobbying thing is and I don't mean this in the time allowed. Can you talk about specific things that she lobbied for versus the firm that was retained? I don't know if Cutter hit the bingo card today. It may have for you. But then when Ms. Bondi explained that this was $115,000 a month for a firm that was handling human trafficking cases, is that bad? So I'm assuming not. So let's go to the next one. What specifically did she or the firm do for these yesterday? She focused with Senator Booker on the abysmal state of the Bureau of Prisons. So she's clearly going to drill down on that. What in your due diligence, what specific acts did she, not her firm, did she engage in that makes you feel like her sincerity towards Senator Booker yesterday was not genuine?
I can't speak to her specific sincerity or motivations, but I can look
Speak specifically to what she lobbied for that you expressed as a concern for the Bureau of Prisons or for the private prisons, specifically what she lobbied for.
Absolutely. So from what we know about her engagements with Geo Group, as mentioned in my testimony, they have been condemned for not having a lot of...
I get it. There are problems with them, but I guess I'm trying to get to what specific issues do you think she carries into this office that would undermine her credibility in trying to do a better job with the Bureau of Prisons? I'm just trying to get to the fact. I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one here. But I'm just trying to figure out what specific acts did she do, other than around here, it'll be on the bingo card for Kash Patel, because we know where that's headed. But what specifically, for any of the high tech, any of them, what specifically did she advocate for, other than the by reference concern that we may have? That's all I want to know from your organization. What specifically have you found about Pam Bondi in a filing, in an argument, in a letter that she specifically said that you believe would undermine her credibility?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, it is about the appearance of impropriety.
Okay, just appearances. So you don't have a specific example.
It's about the engagement with this entity and the
fact so I get it. But in the same way that we know the facts about Qatar now, because we ask about it, it'll be interesting to see what specific role that she played. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Ms. McCord, you worked in the Obama administration. Were you a career or political?
The entirety of my time at the Department of Justice, I was in a career position.
You were in a career position? Okay, thank you. Mr. Gainey, it sounds like I did the same thing, or I have done the same thing that I think Pam Bondi has done, just call somebody out of the blue and say, we got to take it a different direction. Isn't it also, she got a lot of blowback from the Republican legislature for some of the work that she was doing, to the point that Mr. Ehrenberg made. Is that true?
That is true, Senator. In fact, it's the call that Mr. Cox referenced was on a Saturday morning, to be more specific.
I bet if we went back at the time, like I sometimes get attacked, I bet if we went back at the times, we'd probably find several examples where people were taking shots at her from her side of the aisle for doing something that's proven to be very important. So she strikes me as somebody that was her power, that was her influence back in her time as prosecutor, and she stood up to him and did the right thing and didn't really care whether or not she got reelected. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you all. On behalf of the chair, Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Senator Durbin, and thank you to the witnesses before us today. I am going to start with you, Ms. McCord. Welcome back to the committee. If we could just go through these answers, because I think it's really important to put this outside of personal friendships, all these things, whether or not the Attorney General is a Democrat, Republican, who's in charge. And you testified that the Attorney General is not the President's personal attorney. In fact, the person is the attorney for the United States, the AG is. And you referenced Attorney General William French Smith's comments at his nomination hearing. Can you talk about the importance of maintaining this distinction that the AG is the attorney for the U.S. and not for the President?
So it's important not only to have the confidence of the career prosecutors and law enforcement officials, but also to the country, because the loyalty does need to be to the United States and to the Constitution. And there may be times, and I think Senator Durbin pointed out times in the previous Trump administration where the Attorney General did not show sufficient loyalty to Donald Trump, and those attorneys lost their positions.
Okay, thank you. And in your written testimony, you described the Justice Department's White House contacts policy that was established following the Watergate scandal. It's been reaffirmed by AGs under both Republican and Democratic presidents ever since. The policy states that all communications about particular cases from the White House or Congress must be referred to the AG or other high-level officials in the Justice Department in order to preserve the integrity and independence of DOJ investigations from political interference. Yesterday, I asked Ms. Bondi if she agreed with former Attorney General McCasey, Republican Attorney General, that any attempt, that was his words, any attempt by the White House, his words, to interfere with a case is not to be countenanced, and any call to align assistance or to a United States attorney from a political person relating to a case is to be cut and curtailed. She affirmed that she agreed with that statement. You also testified to a parallel White House policy, Ms. McCord. Can you speak to the importance of both the Justice Department and the White House maintaining and abiding by strict contacts policies?
Well, historically, like I said, post-Watergate, these policies have been instituted under Republican and Democratic administrations. In fact, Don McGahn, the White House counsel in the first Trump administration, reissued that White House contacts policy in January of the first term because he recognized the importance that it not just be a DOJ policy, that all within the White House staff know not to pressure the department or other departments and agencies when it comes to specific matters.
And how can Congress exercise its oversight authorities to ensure that the policies on both sides are being followed?
I think starting with the questions you asked yesterday, Senator Klobuchar, is a good start. And if there should come any time where it seems like these policies are not being complied with, or if there is a refusal to adopt or continue those policies, those are something that Congress should be very concerned about.
Okay. Ms. Gilbert, you've been before us many times on the subject of antitrust. And as you know, and I know, and many Democrats and Republicans on this committee know, monopolies will go very far to preserve their power. Tech-funded groups, for instance, spent hundreds of millions of dollars against Senator Grassley in my bill, which was, of course, not just supported by consumer groups, but also by groups as conservative as the NFIB, the Small Business Association, because of the unfairness of monopoly tech companies putting their own products at the top of their search engines and the unfair competition that results when they have that kind of power. You know, there are cases out there right now that are really important on monopolies: Google, Apple, Live Nation, Ticketmaster, RealPage, that are being litigated to their fullest. Why is it important that the new AG continue these cases to protect consumers, enhance competition, and just the general question about the rules of the road and how important this is as Senator Grassley and I reintroduce our bill?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question and for your and Senator Grassley's great work in this space. We are hopeful that the new Department of Justice will continue the cases that have been begun over the last 4 years. We've been really excited to see the strong forward momentum for dealing with corporate concentration, taking on monopolies head on. It's so important for consumers. Public Citizen is a consumer organization, and as we think about regular people and engaging with the markets, if they are squeezed out, if they can't sell their products, if there isn't fair competition, if small businesses can't get ahead, these are all problems for regular Americans. And so just really hopeful that the DOJ will continue what they've started, that these cases roll on, and then also want to put a plug in for your fantastic bill, yours and Senator Grassley's. We hope as the DOJ continues, so can the work here in the Senate on this important policy to stop self-preferencing, as you mentioned.
All right. Well, thank you. And I wanted to thank also others on the panel for their important work when it comes to pill mills and what it was and is going on with these horrible situations where people are getting hooked while people are profiting off of it. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the chair, Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about the newfound concern that my Democrat colleagues have about independence in the AG's office. Given over the last 4 years, it is ironic. Ms. McCord, I do want to ask you, you're talking about the importance of independence. Is it concerning to you that Eric Holder, while he was Attorney General, described himself as Obama's heat shield and his wingman? Is that concerning to you?
That's probably not the best description of the job of the Attorney General, but I think the record probably speaks for itself and speaks differently.
Okay. Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton just days before the FBI interviewed Hillary Clinton on the investigation as it relates to emails. Does that meeting with the spouse and former president of the subject of the investigation, is that concerning to you as it relates to the appearance of independence?
My understanding of that is a chance encounter at an airport on the tarmac, and that does not actually give me concern.
Okay. I don't think that's what happened, but that's an interesting characterization of that. But I think, and I'm going to switch to you now, Mr. Cox, because these are sort of related. I think the frustration a lot of Americans feel and why the decline in trust and faith in the Department of Justice is they saw exactly what happened over the last 4 years, which was a very obvious attempt to try to jail a political opponent. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on that.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but I think that's why you see a lot of the questions that are asked by my Republican colleagues on this committee. It's just this lawfare. We don't want to see it continue. But what we've seen over the last 4 years is a total disgrace. And I think for the hardworking men and women in the Department of Justice who aren't engaged in this, it's affected the department's reputation, and why I'm such a big believer in Pam Bondi and what she can do and try to restore credibility to an agency that has been weaponized and politicized, and get it back to its core function, which is objectively administering justice and taking on violent crime. And I just want to ask you, in your experience with Pam Bondi, this has been what she's done. She's a career prosecutor, right? I mean, you can see her embracing this role of working with, whether it's the U.S. attorneys or other law enforcement around the country, of taking on violent crime, because we need leadership there. We've got a lot of, crime has gone up. And, I'm from a state that has, St. Louis and Kansas City, and we had partnerships when I was Attorney General with the U.S. Attorney's Office to take on violent crime. And when Joe Biden came into office, those were severed for political reasons, which is wrong. It's not a partisan issue. Do you see that as a role that she will play as Attorney General?
Absolutely, but what you just described about the relations with law enforcement is what not only she practiced, she encouraged all of us around her to do. And I could not agree more with you about your assessment of Ms. Bondi on that. Look, we're prosecutors. I mean, at her heart, Pam's a prosecutor. And our job is to go in and fight crime. But, we don't take lightly, those of us that are career prosecutors, that our job is to do justice. I mean, that's what the courts have said. And at her heart, 100%, that's Pam Bondi. It really is. So, yes, and Pam loves law enforcement. I mean, let's not kid each other. We all love law enforcement and everybody and everything they stand for. And so, yes, sir, I believe she would do that with law enforcement and prosecutors. She did it in Florida.
And we'll talk offline about your role. It's an interesting role because in Missouri, the local prosecutors are the ones, there's no office of statewide prosecutors. So I'm not going to ask you about that. I just find that
common.
It's not a common thing. But in your experience in serving with Pam Bondi, did you find her committed to enforcing the law equally and impartially?
Oh, yes, sir, I did. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And she embraced it. Yes, sir, she did. She is a complete prosecutor. She is a total prosecutor. And that's why when I speak to her independence, it's because she believes in it and it's in her heart. I mean, seeing her recently, I know that's where she is. I really truly meant it when I said to my colleagues at the U.S. Department of Justice, if confirmed, you're going to love working with Pam Bondi.
I couldn't agree with you more, which is why I was thrilled to be able to give that introduction yesterday of Pam. I think she's going to be an outstanding Attorney General. And I think like I said yesterday, I think she deserves a bipartisan vote, not only in this committee, but on the Senate floor. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Welch, you're next.
Thank you very much. And I think all the witnesses, I read your statements and watched, and I want to thank the Florida folks for being here on behalf of somebody that you know well and worked with a long time. She clearly is a competent person and has quite a resume. So you've reaffirmed that. A couple of questions that I have are less about her and her qualifications and more about this question that looms out there, where there's a mutual concern here about not using the justice system for political reasons. And there's a point of view with my Republican colleagues that it's been used that way in the prosecutions against Donald Trump. I don't agree with that, but I hear them on that. And there's a concern on my part, and I think a lot of our others, that Donald Trump has made very explicit statements that he intends to pursue political adversaries, and he's named them, including my colleague, Mr. Schiff, Liz Cheney. And he is now a president who enjoys the benefit of he will be a president who enjoys the benefit of the immunity decision by the Supreme Court. I strongly disagree with that decision. I don't think anybody is above the law. That's the whole basis upon which our country was founded. But I take him seriously when he says he wants a prosecutor to go after after his political adversaries. And the tradition in the Justice Department since Watergate has been to really create a near firewall between the administration, the executive, and the Justice Department because of its special role. And all of you are law enforcement, so you just know how awesome that power is that you have, and you have to have restraint as well as aggression. So how does a attorney general handle a president who has already put an immense amount of pressure on Bill Barr, one of his attorney general, who did it on Mr. Sessions? And shouldn't we take seriously the president's threat, President Trump's threat, that he's going to go after his political adversaries? And how do we deal with that? And how do we assess that in terms of this decision? I'll ask you, Ms. McCord, to start.
Thank you, Senator. As we know that in the first Trump administration, Attorney General Sessions made the decision to recuse himself from the Russia investigation because of his work with Donald Trump during the campaign and because of meetings he had had with the Russian ambassador during the campaign. He recognized that appearance of impropriety and the need for independence. He also appointed a special counsel to take over that investigation. Those are the kind of steps that are required when there could be pressure, and there was pressure put on Attorney General Sessions. Indeed, I think forever after that recusal decision, he fell out of favor with the president and ultimately was fired. But those are the things that an independent attorney general needs to take seriously and needs to do to demonstrate that commitment to independence from political influence.
And what's difficult here is that none of us know whoever is in that job and is confronted by a very determined President Trump to do something that from the prosecution point of view may not be appropriate. A political prosecution of an adversary for payback. There's no way to know how any of us, as committed as we are, would be able to withstand that pressure. But I'll talk to you, sir. You work with Pam Bondi, and have a high opinion of her. I'll give you the opportunity to say how she would be able to withstand what I think is inevitably going to be an enormous amount of pressure by the president at a certain point when he decides, directed towards whoever serves as his attorney general.
Let me start out by saying I've been fortunate enough not to be in that situation because I've had attorneys general that I work for, like Pam Bondi and Ashley Moody. However, a prosecutor's job is a solemn thing. The impact we have on lives is, you mentioned the power, and you're absolutely right. It's got to be respected. It's got to be appreciated. It's got to be embraced. And sometimes that means that I've been in positions before where I've thought, if I do or say this, I could lose my job. But you've got to be willing to do that. I don't know how else to say it. It's tough. It's very tough. My job, fortunately, is really not a political job because of my AGs. Right. But you do have to be in the position sometimes when right is right to have to stand up and buck up.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to each of the witnesses who are here today. Mr. Cox, let me start with you.
Yes, sir.
You worked with Attorney General Bondi for over 35 years.
Yes, sir.
Can you speak to her leadership style and how she managed the Attorney General's office?
Fair, of course, very kind, but firm. She was very decisive. That's what I liked about her. But in her decision, Ms. Bondi always listened. There were times she and I disagreed, several times, many times, where we would disagree, and she would hear me out. Sometimes I'd change her mind, believe it or not. So it wasn't often, but it happened. But sometimes, she would listen to me and go the way she felt. That was her job. She was the Attorney General. But she is very firm. She's very decisive. And I will tell you, the number of times I walked with her, she appreciates my role and our role as prosecutors. The number of times I would walk away from her and she wouldn't agree with my decision, maybe on a particular case, and she would tell me, do what you got to do. I mentioned it earlier in my statement. That's the Pam Bondi that I worked with. That's why I'm so confident in her that she can fill this role.
So I think the single most important responsibility that General Bondi will have at the Department of Justice is restoring integrity to the department. I think over the last 4 years, we have seen a pattern of politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice that has done massive damage to that institution, a storied institution that is incredibly important for the rule of law. Speak to your assessment of General Bondi's integrity and her ability to restore integrity to DOJ.
Might I just answer that first off by saying she's a prosecutor, and that's what we're supposed to do. I've spoke to it several times, and I won't repeat myself, Senator. At her heart, she believes in the system. She believes in what we do. I don't think it gets more, with all due respect to everybody in this room and that may be listening, I don't know how much more serious it gets on impacting lives than being a prosecutor and being a judge who has to handle these cases. And she's always respected that. I mentioned in my statement, she's never forgotten, she's never lost her humanity, and she hasn't. Might I say, I don't know if this is answering your question, Pam Bondi likes people, and she wants people to like her. And I don't know that that's so bad for an attorney general either, but she appreciates the impact of this job. I hope I've answered your question, Senator.
All right, Mr. Ehrenberg, let's turn to you. So you and I have known each other 30 years. We were classmates in law school. It's good to see you. Welcome to the swamp. You live in Palm Beach, which is a lot nicer weather than it is up here. And you spent 3 terms as the elected state attorney in Palm Beach County. You're a Democrat. You ran as a Democrat, were elected as a Democrat. And you also, in this last election, voted for Kamala Harris. Is that right?
Correct.
You've also worked closely with General Bondi.
Correct.
In your judgment, describe, same question I asked Mr. Cox, how would you describe her leadership style and how would you describe her integrity?
Well, Senator Cruz, in full disclosure, we weren't just classmates, you and I. We lived in the same dorm first year before either of us had any gray hair.
And burn those pictures.
Fair enough. Mr. Cox is right. She has a very hands-on style. Everyone in the office knows her. She was not isolated from the rest of us. She walked the hallways. She was friends with everyone. She brought her dog to work sometimes, even though it probably violated code. And it was a big dog, the St. Bernard. And she was just she's a very likable
didn't have
person.
A barrel of whiskey under its neck, did it?
Only in Bugs Bunny cartoons. She's a very likable person. And I think you'll find that from everyone who knows her in Tallahassee and throughout Florida. It's hard not to like. You can disagree with her politically, and she and I have our political differences. But as far as a boss, she never tried to big time anyone. She's a person like everyone else. She expects the best from people, but she has a real human touch about her.
Now, you also worked with her very closely, in particular, in going after pill mills. Can you describe what you and she were able to accomplish together on that?
We were able to shut down the pill mills. Florida was the pill supplier for the rest of the country. 98 of the top 100 doctors who dispense pills were in Florida. It was a national embarrassment. The OxyContin Express from Appalachia down to Florida. People would come down, buy their drugs, use, abuse, and then go home and sell them for a profit. We ended that. She appointed me to be the lead person, but we could not have done it without her. She was the person who got the legislature to change the laws. We couldn't have done any of that without that. She was the one who convinced them to pass the prescription drug monitoring program. That was indispensable. So it was her leadership that really led to a dramatic decrease in the number of deaths from opioid overdoses.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for testifying today. Professor McCord, I'd like to ask you about January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Can you succinctly define domestic terrorism?
Domestic terrorism under the United States Code is a crime, an act of violence that is a crime under federal or state law that is done with the attempt to influence a policy of government through intimidation or coercion.
Based on that definition, were some of the acts committed on January 6th acts of domestic terrorism?
Certainly the acts of violence that violate the criminal code do seem to have appeared for many of the people based on their own statements. Many of the defendants in cases that are being prosecuted, they seem to have been done to influence the policy of the government, and specifically to not certify the electoral college ballots on January 6th.
Yesterday, Ms. Bondi refused to disavow President Trump calling the insurrectionists hostages and patriots. What effect would President Trump's pardoning of these criminals have on our country? What is the message if that were to happen?
Senator, I believe it would have an enormous impact on the criminal legal system, and I would say also on our judiciary. In fact, I published a piece about that this morning in The Atlantic. We have our federal judges here appointed by Republicans, Democrats, and President Trump himself, who uniformly have condemned the crimes of those who have been convicted due to their attack on the U.S. Capitol. That anything close to a blanket pardon, which is what has been suggested but not promised by Donald Trump, without individual consideration of cases, would severely undermine these federal judges and undermine the criminal legal system.
We know, and this has come up with one of my colleagues, we know from the disastrous Supreme Court immunity decision that President Trump pretty much has a free pass to do what he wants. An unfettered president is even more dangerous if the Department of Justice is not independent. So based on your extensive experience at the DOJ, are there warning signs that we should watch for to signal that the DOJ has lost its independence?
Senator, I think as we've seen sometimes in the past, that when there are concerns among the career prosecutors and law enforcement officials at the department who have responsibility over investigations and cases, when they have felt pressured, many of them have actually resigned. We saw that during the first Trump administration with respect to some of the prosecutions involving Michael Flynn and Roger Stone.
So I take it that people resigning is one indication that all is not well, that independence is maybe not what's in practice. I'm just wondering, if we were to ask the Attorney General if the President ordered you or suggested or hinted that you go after his perceived political enemies, would the Attorney General be able to cite attorney-client privilege and not respond to us?
I don't want to give a legal opinion on that, Senator. I do think that that is the type of pressure that we are looking to an Attorney General to stand up to from the White House, and I certainly want to take Ms. Bondi at her word when she, under oath yesterday, said she would exercise independence.
Well, the thing is, what's deeply concerning about Ms. Bondi is that she is very loyal to President-elect Trump, and he demands 100% loyalty of all of his people. So yesterday, Ms. Bondi could not say that President Biden had won the election in 2020. That is a basic fact. And I think that it was her loyalty to President-elect Trump that basically made it hard for her, impossible for her to say that President Biden had won the election. So that is concerning. Based on what we heard yesterday, I'm very concerned that if confirmed, Attorney General Bondi will say yes if and when President Trump asks her to do something illegal. And the thing is that not much of what President-elect Trump will do is going to be deemed illegal because of the Supreme Court's disastrous immunity decision. So I'm really struggling with how are we to know that all is not well in terms of the independence of the DOJ. One thing would be if they adopt a policy, or if the president adopts a policy that he will not order the DOJ around, even if this incoming president has said the Justice Department is basically his law firm. So if you have any further suggestions aside from people actually resigning to indicate that the kind of independence we are looking for is not being followed, I would welcome that.
Yes, and Senator
Thank you,
Rono,
Mr.
your
Chair.
time is up. Thank you.
Please respond.
Thank you. Let's see. Mr. Cox, I'd like to start with you. I heard your comments with regards to both Pam Bondi, who we are here for today, and you heap praise on Attorney General Moody, who you work for as well. I'd like to say a public congratulations to her being named Senate designee and be the next senator from Florida. Oh, look, I get to deliver the news to you. So DeSantis just came out and said she will be joining us. I am thrilled. I mean, as a mom of school-age kids, to have another woman sitting right here next to me, fighting for the people that we serve, with what I understand is her brilliant intellect, her ability and her passion for the people of Florida, which I know she will bring to the United States Senate. I cannot wait to call her a colleague. So on behalf of me and all of us, welcome to Attorney General Moody's new Senate designee. We look forward to her taking the ranks.
Might I respond or comment for just
Sure,
briefly?
absolutely.
Senators, you're going to love Ashley Moody. She is a wonderful person to work with. She's brilliant. That is, wow.
Wow,
Thank
right?
you for telling me.
I'm so excited I got to tell you.
Best thing about it is I can say I learned that in the United States
In the
Senate.
United States Senate, that's right. And hopefully she will be appear just in the next few days after we confirm Senator Rubio, who's going to do an exceptional job as Secretary of State. So congratulations to Ashley, and cannot wait to serve with her.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about another amazing woman, Pam Bondi. I have heard you over and over again when you respond to questions talking about her. I think you said she is fair, kind, and firm. You have talked about the fact that she is transparent and impartial. I would like for you one more time to say to the American people, based on your previous work with Pam Bondi, can you explain how she'll continue to operate, you believe, in that manner, in a fair and transparent manner as she takes the helm of the Justice Department?
Because she believes in everything you just questioned me about, and she practiced it in Florida. You know, whether you agreed with her or not, Pam Bondi, like I said, is a person who really likes people. I think we should welcome that into government. I think that sometimes we lose sight of prosecutors. I'm going to speak to myself. We can lose sight of the fact of the ranking member mentioned, the immense power that we have, and we get caught up in it. Pam Bondi doesn't get caught up in those kinds of trappings.
I love it.
Yeah, she loves people, and she at her heart, again, is a prosecutor. As Mr. Ehrenberg had mentioned, nobody has anything to fear from Pam Bondi. She is going to be a breath of fresh air if y'all send her there.
Absolutely, and I think we need to restore those very things, fairness and transparency, to the department, and I look forward to her taking the helm. She's going to do that for the American people, and it's an exciting new day, so thank you so very much.
And thank you for the news.
Absolutely, we are thrilled. So, Mr. Ehrenberg, I learned, obviously, that we need to talk with you offline about getting those the stories on cruise, right? And also that she has a St. Bernard. I have a Newfoundland, so who knew that we both had love for the large dogs? And Sheriff Gainey, I know that you've had an opportunity to work with Pam Bondi as well. I want to talk to you specifically, both of you, about the opioid epidemic, about what we've seen with drug trafficking. I mentioned it yesterday. We heard Pam lean into this as well, but there is nowhere in my state that I travel where someone does not tell me a story about about losing a loved one to opioid abuse, addiction, overdose. And so tell me from your experience and how she works with state and local law enforcement officers, state and local leaders. I'm a big believer that local leaders know best. And you have people that come to DC that somehow get here and believe that we've become experts on every issue. And the truth is you have to talk to the boots on the ground to learn what to do, how to do it, and to affect real change. And so can you both speak to her relationships with state and local law enforcement and workforce and how you believe she'll carry that to the Department of Justice, please?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Britton. Thank you for the news about Attorney General Moody. I hope Nick Cox still has a job when he goes home. When I was Attorney General Bondi's drug czar, we were visited by Gil Kurlikowski, who was President Obama's drug czar nationally. And it was a very productive meeting. I still have the pictures from that meeting. Not once was there ever discussion that, well, he's from the feds, we shouldn't trust him. He's a Democrat, we shouldn't trust him. None of that. We were just trying to get the job done. And so she's seen it from both perspectives, as a state official working with the feds and now being a federal official working with the locals. The person who can best talk about how she has a great relationship with local law enforcement is Emory Gainey, because he was the liaison. She had a special liaison within her office to make sure that she had a seamless relationship working with local officials. I saw it, but Mr. Gainey is the best to talk about it.
Yes, and Sheriff Gainey, if you don't mind leaning into that, I am out of time, but would love to hear your response.
Thank you, Senator. Unequivocally, that's one of the four leaning rules of Pam Bondi. Work with our law enforcement leaders. Learn and understand the issues that each of those face. I mentioned earlier, we are a large state, as you well know. So there are diverse issues that the law enforcement from one end of our state, the others have to deal with. But Pam listens to those. She encourages those. She asks for advice. Want to know what's happening in the community. Just the whole pill mill. And the bath salt issue was brought to her by a panhandle sheriff, quite frankly. What we've learned in law enforcement, we often see these things first. We start seeing these trends, and then we try to get them to our legislative leaders and our cabinet leaders to say, this is happening in our state. Sometimes they listen to us, other times they don't. Pam listened. She listened right away. She immediately sought out to understand what was causing that issue and then sought legislation to get it done against some of our Republican legislators at the time who didn't want it. But her tenacity prevailed. She got it done. Our state is a safer state because of Pam Bondi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Senator Schiff.
Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Greatly appreciate your testimony. Ms. McCord, you testified. Thank you for all your good work over the years. You testified before the committee last September on the repercussions of Trump versus the United States, the case on presidential immunity. You wrote, I think in your written testimony, there's nothing stopping a president from directing the investigation of his political enemies, journalists, or activists, even where there is no basis for doing so. As you will recall from the hearing yesterday, I asked Ms. Bondi a number of questions about what her intentions were, how she would respond if the president asked her to investigate someone, whether she thought there was a factual predicate for a case, for example, an investigation against Jack Smith or Liz Cheney. For the most part, she refused to answer any specific question. Didn't give me a lot of confidence in her willingness to push back against those kind of improper orders from the president. What should the Attorney General do if a president is now, by virtue of this dangerous Supreme Court decision, immune from prosecution from violating the law and using the Department of Justice to do it? It doesn't mean the Attorney General should go along with it. What should the Attorney General do if the president says, I want you to investigate such and such political opponent?
Well, first of all, I would say the immunity decision right now, as far as we know, applies only to the president. And so there's no immunity for Attorney General Bondi if she were to engage in illegal activity or unconstitutional activity in carrying out a directive of Donald Trump. But I think before we even get to that, it would be important for her to make clear that she is not going to direct her department attorneys or the FBI to initiate unfounded investigations. If they're as the departments of justice throughout all of my tenure there, always we followed the facts and the law and did not target any person for investigation based on political reasons. So it's really, that's why the independence is so much more important even now in the wake of that decision, because she is the first person to have a position of standing up to the president.
I also asked Ms. Bondi whether she would commit to preserving the evidence that was gathered as a part of the January 6th investigation by the department. She refused to commit to even preserving the evidence. Are there laws in place, or is it merely department policy not to destroy evidence? Should we have any confidence that that evidence will be preserved?
Well, there certainly are Federal Records Act obligations that require the records be maintained. And so I think that she would be well advised to consult with attorneys, career attorneys who specialize in the Department of Justice, and be guided by their counsel. And it's certainly important in this case, as in these cases, as in every case prosecuted by the Department of Justice or investigated, to maintain records.
And if I could ask both you and Ms. Gilbert, recusal question. So, Ms. McCord, maybe let me ask you about where you think the circumstance would be appropriate for her to recuse herself vis-a-vis her prior representation of the president. And Ms. Gilbert, in terms of her corporate clients as a lobbyist, when would it be appropriate for her to recuse herself from working on or influencing department decisions vis-a-vis her former lobbyist clients?
Senator Schiff, I think with respect to her previous, personal representation of Donald Trump, she needs to be very concerned, as William French Smith was when he took on this job for President Reagan, having been Reagan's personal attorney, that anything that would appear to be improper, that would show impartiality, she should recuse from. So, for example, investigations into anyone who was involved in the first impeachment proceedings or prosecution, because she defended Donald Trump in those proceedings. Even any investigations or prosecutions into those involved with the cases against Donald Trump, because she has made public statements about prosecutors and investigators needing to be targeted potentially. She's used the term the bad ones. I'm not sure what that means in legal parlance. So I think these are the types of matters, including also civil matters. There is Donald Trump has, through his attorneys, filed notice of a civil action against the Department of Justice based on the search of Mar-a-Lago. Clearly, it would be improper for her to take any part in that in responding to that case.
Thank you. And I just would like to note that obviously yesterday she clarified that she'd never represented President Trump in a personal matter, but actually worked there directly with the White House. Also, it's interesting because we have seen this body confirm members who have lobbied for the Chinese Communist Party and confirmed them to positions at ODNI. And it didn't seem that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle had an issue with that. And it's also interesting that we continue to hear General Sessions being brought up at these hearings over and over again. I do want to remind people, obviously, he is from the great state of Alabama, but not one member of the Democratic Party in this actual hearing voted for him through his confirmation process. So I just want to make sure that we set the record straight on that as well. But thank you to all of our witnesses.
I know I'm out of time.
Yes.
Would it be possible for the other witness to answer? She didn't have an opportunity because the clock ran out.
I think we are out of time, but I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. I know that some of you traveled long and hard to be here, and we are grateful that you did that. The record will stay open until 5 p.m. tonight, and so if you would like to add something to that, you are more than welcome to. And all written questions are due at that time as well. The hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.